After moving to an isolated countryside house seeking silence and recovery, a man begins to notice disturbing changes in his dog's behavior. Everything starts on a night when an unnatural fog rolls in, thick enough to swallow the road and distort sound itself. The dog sees something in the fog, something the owner never can. From that night on, the animal becomes quiet, obedient, and unnervingly vigilant. As the fog returns and the isolation deepens, the narrator realizes the creature did not come to take the dog. It came to learn through it. And now it knows the house, the routines, and who is no longer at the top of the hierarchy. My dog was always the first to notice when something was wrong. Not in a mystical sense, not the exaggerated instinct people like to romanticize in animals. It was simpler than that, more honest. He heard things before I did, smelled things I never could, reacted without needing a reason. That's why, when he changed, I knew, long before I admitted it, that it wasn't my imagination. The house sat at the end of a dirt road that barely deserved to be called one. No signs, no nearby neighbors, just tall grass, old trees, and a silence that didn't feel empty. It felt contained, like the place was holding its breath. I moved there to escape noise, people, memory. The city had become too crowded for the weight I was carrying. I believed the countryside would slow things down, that nights would be cleaner, that thoughts would organize themselves if given enough quiet. I brought very little with me: clothes, a mattress, a table, and him, Thor. A large mixed-breed dog with dark fur and eyes that seemed too alert for an animal who'd never been trained. He always slept near the door, never barked without cause, never reacted to wind or meaningless sounds until the night of the fog. That was the first time I watched the road disappear. It wasn't normal mist. It didn't creep in slowly. One moment the yard was visible, the next it was swallowed by a dense white wall that erased distance and depth entirely. Thor froze, completely. His tail dropped stiff. His ears rose in a way I had never seen before. His body leaned forward, not in aggression, but in absolute attention. "Thor!" I called, already realizing my voice sounded too low. He didn't turn, didn't sniff the air, didn't bark. He was looking, straight into the fog. I followed his gaze and saw nothing, no shadow, no movement, not even the illusion of shape you get when you stare too long into darkness. But Thor began to tremble, not from cold. I knew the difference. This was internal, a fine vibration that ran through his legs as if the ground itself were unstable. "Come inside," I said, trying to sound calm. That's when he did something he had never done before. He sat, not because I commanded him, not because he was tired. He sat like something had instructed him, but not me. The fog shifted slightly, not advancing, not retreating, just adjusting, as if something behind it had repositioned itself. Thor lowered his head and whimpered. The sound was small, restrained, almost respectful. My stomach dropped. I pulled his collar harder than I meant to. Thor resisted for exactly 1 second, then gave in. But once inside, he didn't go to his usual spot, didn't drink water, didn't explore. He positioned himself directly in front of the door and stayed there. That night, he didn't sleep. Neither did I. The fog lingered outside until dawn, motionless, unnaturally silent, and every time I looked at Thor, his eyes were open, alert, as if he was still seeing something I no longer could. By morning, the road was visible again. Clear sky, normal air. The world had decided to pretend nothing happened. Thor hadn't. He began watching me instead of following me, tracking my movements with something that wasn't affection. It was evaluation. He slept less, barked less, and when he did bark, it was always toward the trees. Sometimes in the middle of the night, he stood in the hallway staring at my bedroom door, as if waiting for permission to enter. That's when I understood the most disturbing truth. Thor hadn't become aggressive. He had become submissive. And that only happens when an animal recognizes something it cannot challenge, something it accepts, something that now knew the house. After the night of the fog, Thor stopped behaving like a dog, not in any obvious dramatic way. He still ate when I fed him, still drank water, still moved through the house. But something fundamental had been quietly rearranged inside him, like an invisible hierarchy rewritten without ceremony. I was no longer at the top. What terrified me most was how natural it seemed to him. The days that followed were unnaturally quiet. Not the gentle countryside silence people talk about, the kind filled with insects and distant wind. This silence felt selective, as if sound itself chose not to approach the house. Thor no longer played. He didn't chase shadows or lie on his back asking for attention. Instead, he positioned himself in precise locations, near the front door, halfway down the hallway, beside the window facing the trees, always watching, always listening. Sometimes I called his name just to test reality. Thor. He would turn his head slowly, look at me, hold eye contact for several seconds longer than was comfortable, then look away. He wouldn't come, wouldn't wag his tail. It felt as if he were assessing me and deciding I wasn't a priority. The house seemed to operate on two rhythms now. Mine, uneven and uncertain, and his, calm, alert, aligned with something I couldn't perceive. The fog returned on the third night, not all at once. It began as a distortion in the air, a subtle thickness near the far edge of the yard, as if my eyes were failing to focus. Thor noticed immediately. He stood without warning, walked to the door with slow, deliberate steps, sat in the exact same spot as before. No barking, no growling, waiting. By the time the clock read just past 2 in the morning, the fog had sealed everything. The fence vanished, the trees disappeared, the world beyond the house ceased to exist. Thor tilted his head slightly. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. "What are you seeing?" I whispered. He didn't react to my voice, but he reacted to something outside. His tail moved once, slowly, downward, a gesture of submission. My stomach twisted. That's when I noticed something new. Thor wasn't looking straight ahead. He was looking slightly downward, as if whatever held his attention stood at chest height, or at the eye level of something that didn't need to be tall to dominate. The fog moved in layers, shifting without displacement, as though something were passing through it without disturbing it. "Thor, come here," I said, my voice breaking. He didn't move, and for the first time since I'd adopted him, he did something that made my chest tighten with dread. He lowered his head further, not in fear, in acknowledgement. That night, I dreamed while awake. I didn't fall asleep. I know I didn't. But images came with the sharpness of dreams. I saw Thor standing outside the house, surrounded by fog, perfectly still. Something without shape approached him. There was no face, no body, just the overwhelming certainty that it was ancient, too old to need form. In the vision, Thor didn't flee. He remained, alert, available. When the image faded, I realized I was sitting upright in bed, drenched in sweat. Thor stood in the doorway. He hadn't entered. He was waiting. "You can come in," I said without thinking. He took one step forward, then stopped, looked down the hallway, looked at me, then slowly sat in the doorway, precisely on the threshold between my room and the rest of the house, as if guarding something or someone. I began to notice changes in myself. Nothing dramatic, nothing I could clearly point to. But I felt watched even when alone. Thoughts arrived already sorted, too clean, as if something had filtered them before allowing them through. When anxiety rose, it dissolved too quickly. When memories tried to surface, they softened before they could hurt. This should have felt like relief. It didn't. It felt like something was deciding what I was allowed to feel. And Thor seemed aware of it. Sometimes in the middle of the night, he stood beside the bed. He didn't touch me, didn't lie down. Just stood there, watching me with an expression that didn't belong on an animal. It wasn't affection, it was surveillance. The fog began appearing while I was awake. Not fully, not swallowing everything. Sometimes it was just a dense patch between the trees. Other times, a thickness near the fence line. Thor responded to all of it, always the same way. He sat, lowered his head, waited. One afternoon, I heard something I wasn't supposed to hear. A sound from within the fog. Not a voice, not a word, More like a rehearsal, as if something were testing how air worked, learning how to shape vibration. Thor whimpered, then very slowly lay down, exposing his throat. My blood went cold, because that wasn't fear, that was offering. That night I finally understood. Thor hadn't been traumatized, he had been recognized. Whatever lived in the fog hadn't attacked him, hadn't threatened him. It had introduced itself in the only way truly dominant things do, without force, without urgency, without explanation. Thor accepted it, and now he was doing what he had always done best, protecting the house. Just not for me, protecting it for that thing. When I lay down, the silence settled heavily over the bedroom. Thor positioned himself beside the bed, sitting upright, facing the door, waiting, as if something were about to enter or leave. Before turning off the light, a certainty settled into me, heavy and irreversible. If it wanted to come inside, Thor would make room. The moment I accepted that Thor was no longer reacting to the fog, but cooperating with it, something inside me shifted permanently. Not panic, not denial, alignment, like a piece sliding into a place it had always been meant to occupy. The fog stopped feeling external. It no longer felt like something that arrived. It felt like something that waited. Even on clear mornings, I sensed it beyond the trees, held back only by daylight. The air carried a faint density, as if reality itself had learned a new default state. Thor adjusted accordingly. He stopped reacting sharply. No sudden movements, no surprise. His vigilance became continuous, economical. He conserved energy the way working animals do when they understand their role. He no longer followed me. He tracked me. Wherever I went in the house, he repositioned, not to be near me, but to maintain angles, lines of sight, control of space. Always between me and the outside, sometimes between me and rooms I had just left. Once, I tried to step past him in the hallway. He didn't growl, he didn't bare his teeth, he simply didn't move. I stopped, not because I was afraid, because something in his stillness told me the decision had already been made. The sound came 3 nights later, not from the fog, from inside the house. It was subtle, so subtle I almost missed it. A soft shift in pressure, like air adjusting around a shape that hadn't been there before. Thor reacted instantly. He sat, lowered his head, and faced the corner of the living room. The corner was empty, but the air wasn't. I felt it press against my skin, dense and deliberate, like the presence of someone standing too close without touching you. My pulse roared in my ears. "There's nothing there," I said aloud, more to anchor myself than to convince anyone. Thor didn't look at me. The pressure deepened, and then came something worse than a voice. A recognition, not words, not sound. The sudden invasive certainty that whatever stood in that corner knew exactly where I was in the room, knew exactly where I was in the room. Not by sound, not by movement, by position. I became acutely aware of my own body. The weight of my feet against the floor, the shallow rhythm of my breathing, the heat pooling behind my eyes. The pressure in the corner didn't move. It didn't need to. Thor lowered his head further, spine straight, tail still, a posture I'd only ever seen once before, at a training facility, when a handler entered a pen with animals bred for obedience. This wasn't fear. This was protocol. I took one step back. Thor's ears twitched. The pressure in the corner adjusted, subtly, like a lens refocusing. I froze. That's when I understood something that made my throat tighten. It wasn't learning from Thor anymore. It was learning through him. Thor wasn't reacting. He was relaying. That night the fog didn't return. It wasn't necessary. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe, because that's what it felt like now. The walls no longer creaked randomly. Sounds arrived with intention, spaced too evenly to be coincidence. Thor sat beside the bed, not touching it, not leaning against me, facing outward, guarding something I could not see. I felt excluded. A thought drifted into my mind, smooth and unforced. "You don't need to be alert anymore." I sat up abruptly. "What?" I whispered. Thor didn't move. The thought continued, not as a voice, but as an internal correction. You've done your part. My chest tightened. What part? Silence. But the silence felt complete, like a statement that didn't require repetition. I realized then that exhaustion had become my most dangerous vulnerability. Every instinct I had, every rule I'd ever trusted, relied on alertness, on questioning, on resistance, and I was so tired. The dream came without sleep. I saw the house from above, swallowed by fog so thick it erased the ground. Thor stood at the front door, perfectly still. Behind him, the fog condensed, not into a body, into intention. It leaned, not forward, not back, but into the space Thor occupied, as if merging with his understanding of the world. Thor didn't look afraid. He looked complete. When I tried to call his name, my voice didn't exist. When I tried to move, the dream didn't acknowledge me. I was irrelevant. I woke gasping, heart hammering. Thor was gone. For a moment, just one. I felt relief. Then I noticed the front door was open. I found him outside, standing at the edge of the yard. The fog wasn't visible, but it was there. I could feel it pressing against the air, waiting just beyond sight. Thor stood facing it, posture rigid, head low. Between him and the trees, the grass was flattened in a long, shallow path. Not footprints, not tracks, a resting place. As if something had paused there, as if something had leaned down long enough to be remembered by the ground. "Thor," I said quietly. He didn't turn. I took a step forward. He lifted his head slightly, not to warn me, to signal attention elsewhere. That's when I heard it. A sound, not spoken, not shaped, forming behind my thoughts, testing, practicing, learning the weight of intention. The fog didn't want my dog. It never had. It wanted what Thor gave freely: observation, acceptance, submission without panic. And now, standing there at the edge of the yard, with my own dog guarding the space between me and the unseen, I realized the final truth of it. The abyss wasn't staring back anymore. It had already looked, already learned, already decided. The change didn't announce itself. There was no single moment where I could say, "This is when I lost control." No scream, no confrontation, no final mistake. What settled over the house was quieter than that. It was procedure. Thor began moving before things happened, not reacting, anticipating. If I stood up too quickly, he repositioned. If I headed toward the back door, he appeared in the hallway first. If I paused too long near a window, he shifted his weight, subtle but deliberate, drawing my attention away. At first, I told myself it was coincidence. Then I realized something worse. I was obeying him, not consciously, not out of fear, out of comfort. It was easier to let him guide the flow of the house, easier to follow paths that felt approved, easier not to ask why some rooms felt heavier than others. The house rewarded this compliance. The air felt calmer, the silence less oppressive. My thoughts simpler. I stopped dreaming, or rather, I stopped remembering dreams. Sleep became blank, uninterrupted, heavy. I would wake with the unsettling sense that something important had happened during the night, something structured, deliberate, but my mind refused to retrieve it. Thor always woke before I did. He sat beside the bed, watching the door, not guarding me, guarding the boundary. Once, I reached out to touch him. My hand stopped an inch from his fur, not because he moved, because something inside me said don't. The command wasn't external, it was already installed. The house developed preferences. Light stayed on in rooms I used most. Doors closed gently behind me. The floor stopped creaking in certain places, as if aware of where silence mattered. Other areas became uncomfortable. The storage room, the far corner of the living room, the space behind the couch. Thor avoided those places completely, not fearfully, deliberately, like areas that were no longer meant for movement. One afternoon, I noticed the indentation on the couch, a shallow, permanent depression in the cushion nearest the armrest, exactly the shape of someone who sat often, too often. Thor lay nearby, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed, at peace. That's when I understood the scar the presence was carving. Not damage, accommodation. I tried to leave, not dramatically, not in panic. I packed slowly, methodically. I told myself I'd just spend a few nights elsewhere, test distance, reset. Thor watched. He didn't block me, didn't resist. But when I reached for my keys, I felt it, that gentle internal resistance. The same quiet correction that had been guiding my thoughts for days. No urgency, no danger. Later is fine. My hand relaxed. The keys stayed on the table. Thor exhaled softly. The house felt satisfied. The fog returned one last time. Not outside, inside. It wasn't visible as mist. It manifested as a density in the rooms Thor avoided. A pressure that bent sound and swallowed attention. I stood in the doorway of the living room, staring at the corner where the air felt thickest. Thor sat beside me. I realized then that he was no longer watching the space. He was watching me, waiting for permission, for confirmation, for acceptance. I know, I whispered. The pressure deepened. Thor lowered his head. The hierarchy finalized itself without ceremony. That night the bed shifted. Not beside me, not gradually, firmly, like someone sitting with confidence. Thor didn't react. He lay down, faced away. I felt no panic, only a dull, spreading understanding. The presence didn't need to frighten me anymore. Fear was inefficient. Compliance was cleaner. As the weight settled, a final thought moved through me. Not intrusive, not hostile, just factual. This position no longer requires you. I lay still, listening to my own breathing slow under guidance that no longer felt foreign. Some scars bleed. Others simply teach you where not to resist. And those are the ones that never heal. The first time I realized the house no longer responded to me, it wasn't dramatic. That's what frightens me most, even now. Nothing slammed, nothing resisted, nothing warned me. The house simply hesitated. I spoke aloud one morning just to hear a human voice. I'm going outside. The words felt strange in my mouth, as if they were no longer instructions, just sounds. Thor lifted his head, didn't move, didn't object. The door remained closed. I waited. Seconds passed. Then, without my touching it, the latch clicked. The door opened just enough to let air in, not enough for me to leave, enough to prove something else had heard. My throat tightened. I said, I'm going outside. I repeated louder this time. The door didn't move. Behind me, Thor exhaled. Slow, calm. Approval, not concern. That's when it struck me. The house wasn't ignoring me. It was waiting to see who would answer instead. It began with small corrections. When I reached for a glass, my hand hesitated, then adjusted, selecting a different one. When I started down the hallway, my steps slowed, turned, rerouted. Not forced, suggested. And each time, the suggestion felt reasonable, helpful. I found myself thinking, yes, that's better. That makes more sense. I don't need to do it that way. Those thoughts didn't feel foreign. That was the trick. They felt like clarity. The mirror confirmed it. I stood in front of it one afternoon, studying my reflection for something wrong. There was nothing wrong. That was the problem. My posture was steadier, my expression calmer. The constant tension in my face, the one I'd carried for years, had faded. I looked, improved. Behind me, Thor appeared in the doorway. He met my reflection's eyes. Not mine. The reflection smiled. I did not. The voice came that night, not from the fog, not from the corners, from my mouth. I woke sitting upright in bed, heart pounding, having just heard myself speak. A full sentence, clear, confident. I'll take care of it. I hadn't decided to say that. Thor was sitting at the foot of the bed, watching, satisfied. I pressed my hands against my face, grounding myself in sensation. This is my body, I whispered. The correction arrived instantly, not exclusively. People came. That was the final proof. A man appeared at the edge of the property one afternoon, waving, lost, confused, ordinary. I wanted to scream at him to leave. My mouth didn't open. Instead, I watched myself walk forward, watched my hand lift, watched my face arrange itself into something reassuring. "Can I help you?" I said. But I wasn't speaking, I was listening. The man relaxed immediately. Thor stood beside me. Beside him, posture neutral, eyes alert. The hierarchy held. The man stepped closer. And in that moment, I understood exactly what I had become. Not a victim, not a ghost, a delay. The hesitation people feel before trusting. The instinct that whispers something is wrong and is usually ignored. I was that whisper now. Nothing more, nothing less. That night I slept on the floor, not because I chose to, because the bed was occupied. Thor lay beside it, facing outward. The mattress dipped once, decisively. And then the house settled into silence. The kind that means everything is where it belongs. A thought passed through me, quiet and complete. This arrangement is stable. I lay there staring at the underside of furniture, feeling my awareness thin, stretch, redistribute. I didn't disappear, I was reassigned, and as my consciousness softened, I realized the most terrifying truth of all. The thing in the fog didn't need my dog anymore. It had learned enough. I didn't vanish. That would have been cleaner. That would have made this a story with an ending people could digest, categorize, forget. What happened instead was quieter. I stayed. Time stopped behaving the way I remembered. Days didn't blur. They flattened. Morning and night felt identical, distinguished only by light through windows I no longer approached. Hunger arrived without urgency. Fatigue existed without weight. I observed myself moving through the house, not as a reflection, not as a double, as a continuation. He, the one wearing my face, moved with certainty, no hesitation, no wasted motion. The house responded to him instantly, as if it recognized authority rather than occupancy. Doors opened when he approached, lights adjusted. The air itself felt aligned. Thor followed him, not closely, respectfully. I tried to intervene once, just once. A thought formed, sharp, insistent. "Don't go in there." The body paused. For less than a second, Thor lifted his head. The pause ended. The body continued. The thought dissolved. That was the moment I understood the limit of my existence. I wasn't silenced. I was outvoted. The fog never returned visibly. It didn't need to. The house carried it now, not as mist, but as habit, as structure, as routine. The fog had always been a method, not a location. What mattered wasn't the presence, it was the pattern. Sit, observe, adjust, remain. The same pattern Thor had recognized, the same one I had grown tired enough to accept. Occasionally people arrived, delivery drivers, lost travelers. Once a couple looking for land nearby. I felt something then, a tightening, an urgency I hadn't felt in a long time. I tried to push, to warn, to reach, and sometimes something happened. A pause, a glance away, a decision not to stay. Those were my victories, small, inconsistent, enough to prove I wasn't gone, enough to prove I was tolerated. Thor aged quickly, or maybe I only noticed time again when it mattered. His movement slowed, his vigilance softened, he slept more. One evening he lay down near the doorway and didn't get back up. The body, my body, knelt beside him, spoke softly, touched him with care. Thor looked up once, not at the body, at me, and in that look was something like apology, or gratitude, I don't know. When he died, the house didn't change. That's when I understood how little he was needed anymore. If you are hearing this now, understand something. The thing that came in the fog wasn't hunting. It was evaluating. It didn't want violence. It didn't want fear. It wanted efficiency. It wanted the version of a person who stops insisting on authorship. And it found that version through patience, through exhaustion, through silence. If you ever notice someone change without cause, if an animal reacts to something you can't see, if a place feels more organized than it should, pay attention. And if one night you feel the world gently adjust around you, if resistance starts to feel unnecessary, if staying feels easier than leaving, don't assume that means you're safe. Some things don't need to chase you. They only need you to stop claiming your place. And once you do, they will answer in your stead.